So let's start there because, a big part of American inequality is figuring out what is going on at the local level and trying to tear down a bit of this national narrative to see what's going on in communities. So can you talk a bit about how much states actually matter in, driving some of these
Yeah.
outcomes? Is it really just the federal government that is calling all the shots, or can states make a big difference?
I mean, Hakeem Jeffries, just so people know, would be speaker today if North Carolina had had a different legislature. And just something to think about that states have so much influence, especially over the redistricting process, which used to take place every decade. Now, apparently, is taking place every couple of years, thanks to Donald Trump. But, you know, if you think about the fact that states, in a lot of these states, you elect your Supreme Court justices, you elect your state, certainly you elect your state legislators who then draw partisan maps that a court either approves or doesn't approve. And what that means is in places like North Carolina, they created such a gerrymandered map that was upheld by their state Supreme Court, which is also very conservative, that it deprived not just the people in North Carolina of an ability to actually have representation that reflected their
Right.
demographics, but resulted in Republicans picking up extra seats that then tipped the House to the Republicans federally. So that's just one example. And then, of course, you go to examples in the states with abortion laws and other places that are other issues that are very high profile, with access to Medicaid expansion. I mean, all of these things directly impact millions, all of us, right? Over 300 million of us. And yet, I think not enough attention is paid to that. Part of that is because of the death of local media. Part of that is because it's just obviously people living in New York, as I do, don't think much about what's going on in places like North Carolina or Texas because they don't think it affects them. But
Right.
it does. I mean, it does. And that's something to really consider as we go through this process.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting in a time where our federal politics feels so gridlocked and unable to, achieve new, sweeping pieces of legislation, the role that states can play in, some of those things, even, gerrymandering aside and its ability to, kind of
Yeah.
influence, who achieves, kind of those levels of Congress. Um, yeah, so let's talk about some of those specific ones where states are really, making those differences. I know you mentioned abortion already. Minimum wage is obviously a critical one, right? I think there's 18 states right now that still have that still follow the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. So where are those, areas, right? Abortion, I think it's, kind of a critical one where you're also seeing like states are the, big determinants of where, policy is going to shake out one way or another.
Yeah. I mean, one that impacts everybody is, of course, healthcare and Medicaid expansion and the expansion of Medicaid under Obamacare. There were a lot of states on the Republican side that refused to do that because the word Obamacare was so anathema to
Right.
them and to their constituents. And yet, when you look at it, what's happening at the federal level with these cuts to Medicaid are going to really, and I mean, really impact voters and constituents in ways that are just catastrophic. You had places like Missouri expand under Obamacare, and all of a sudden, this very conservative federal United States senator from Missouri is like, "Oh my God, what are we doing? I don't want to vote against this." He ended up voting
Right.
for it, but and to do it, but then said, "Oh, we have to come back and fix this because it's going to impact my constituents." Well, too late, right? Trump is not going to fix it, and nobody is going to fix it. So you reap what you sow. But there are millions and millions of people in Missouri who are now going to be living, if they're going to be alive at all, under much worse circumstances because they're not going to be able to get their mom into a nursing home. They're not going to be able to get health care themselves. Um, these subsidies under Obamacare are going to go away, which means that states will force, when you buy something on an exchange, you buy it through a state exchange.
Yeah.
And as a result, your healthcare is going to go up tremendously. I mean, our state's going to be able to subsidize that. Unlike the federal government, states have a balanced budget that they need to present every year. So they can't just borrow money without balancing their budget the way the federal government does or go into a deficit. They can certainly borrow the money, but that results in you paying higher taxes because you have to borrow
Yeah.
money and pay interest on those, on that money that you borrowed. So all of this is really deeply interconnected, and very much something that I think sounds almost overwhelming when people think about it. And as I said before, if you live in New York, do you really care about what's happening in Idaho or what's happening in California? But you should, because it impacts all of us. And you see that happening. I mean, you have states that are sort of creating sanctuary policies for women who need to get abortions, but can't get an abortion in Texas, for instance. You have states like New Jersey that are saying, hey, you can come to New Jersey and get an abortion here. If you live in Texas, what the outcome of the New Jersey governor's race this year, is going to be should impact you. It affects you because should you find yourself in a situation where you need to terminate a pregnancy or you're having a miscarriage of
Yeah.
some sort, New Jersey may be a place for you to go or maybe not, depending on the outcome of this race. So, I mean, I think all of this is very much something that people need to consider and think about, irrespective of where they live.
Right. And I know many people who have, decided, to move where they live, go to different, states as a result of, some of those changes in policy, particularly, around, abortion and healthcare for women. And so it's, yeah, not only impacting you, but, where you might, find yourselves. And I think
Mhm.
on the Medicaid expansion part, the data is so clear at how helpful it has been for increasing life expectancy, for driving down costs, for getting so many more people insured who would have had insurance otherwise. And I think it's one of these things, exactly as you said, in Missouri, where the proof is in the pudding. Once you kind of sign up for that, you really start to see the benefits for communities. And so those states which have not signed up, it creates this almost like natural experiment about what differences in health outcomes can be for those communities, and we see far worse health outcomes for those areas that have not expanded Medicaid. And with the challenges to that, we might find ourselves in a far worse position going forward. Um, I think it might also be interesting. For you to share a little bit about a conversation I know you recently had around what states can do to fight back against censorship. I thought this was, kind of an interesting conversation that you had, and understanding what this area, which we talk a little bit less on, kind of American inequality, sort of the role of the state and allowing free speech. But we're curious if you could talk about, free speech, since I know that's also a big
Sure.
part
I
of some of the
mean,
work you cover.
yeah, look, I mean, it's not that we're approaching fascism from my perspective. We're there, right? And people need to take that seriously. I know that it sounds kind of hyperbolic, but the reality is you see what's happening, not just with ICE arresting people who are undocumented migrants, which in my view is bad enough already in the way they do it. But you had a Presbyterian minister who was peacefully protesting outside of a
Yeah.
Broadview, Illinois, um, ICE facility and praying for the ICE agents and basically telling them to repent, which is his First Amendment right, regardless of whether you agree with his message or not. And what did they do? They fired pepper balls at his head. Um, Completely something that would not happen. If this were the use of force of any police department, those people would be immediately taken off the
Yeah, the
force.
the
And
video of it is just
yeah, the video was
horrific.
just
Yeah.
horrific, right? And you think about that, and you think about what this government is allowing to happen in its name, and it's deeply disturbing. The president kind of slipped and said, we're going to get rid of free speech. Now, the beauty of Donald Trump is nothing is secret. There's no secret plan, right? They told you, and they continue to tell you everything that they're going to do. Project 2025 was right there in the open for anybody to read before the election. So if you're shocked and disappointed and dismayed at what's happening now, and you voted for Trump, well, you should have done some reading before the
Yeah.
election. You would not have been shocked or dismayed. Um, and the same thing here. I mean, you constantly have all of these elected officials, or, whether it's Trump or any of his enablers in Congress, or more relevantly, people like Stephen Miller and members of his administration, effectively saying we're going to go after anybody who's Antifa. Well, they can't define Antifa because Antifa does not exist as an organization. I mean, there are little chapters of 4 or 5 people who call themselves quote unquote Antifa. I can call myself, the Queen of England if I want, but that's not who they're going after. Antifa was actually something that was created by Russian aligned bots on social media about 20 years ago, made its way into the Fox News sort of,
Yeah.
echo chamber. And I used to
Right.
work at Fox, so I can tell you this was completely made up in some production meeting. Then people like Sean Hannity, Megyn Kelly, and others in prime time really ran with the Antifa thing, and it eventually got into Trump's head, and now it became, because he watches a lot of Fox, and then it became a thing, right? But if you're going to go after Antifa in the same way that Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, threatened to go after them in the way that they go after, as they call, drug cartels, which is blowing up boats off the shores of Venezuela without any due process. Kash Patel said they're going to go after the funders of Antifa. And Kristi Noem said something similar. I mean, all of these quotes were just horrific. What that says is if you disagree with anything Trump does, you are Antifa, because they can't define what Antifa is. So it is people who are, in their mind, anti-Trump. Well, that's our First Amendment rights. Except that Stephen Miller then gave up kind of the game on CNN the other day and said, well, the president has plenary authority to go after these people. And plenary
And,
authority is another word for authoritarianism.
and then just decided to freeze.
And then
Like,
decided to freeze, and CNN, disgracefully, when they put the clip up, got rid of that.
Right.
Got rid of the quote for plenary authority. It was just
Yeah, I saw that.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
So what you're dealing with here is people who are telling you exactly what they're doing. And they're basically saying that they are going to get rid of your First Amendment rights to protest, to march. There is a No Kings rally happening next weekend. And is that Antifa? Are the people marching Antifa? I mean, because they are anti this. And if so, what is this administration going to do to them? Are they going to go after groups like Indivisible that are the conveners of these rallies and saying you fund this kind of stuff? They're now going after George Soros. I guess he's been the boogeyman for so many years. I don't know, whatever. But they're not afraid, as they've shown, to go after people they consider to be their enemies, whether it's Jim Comey or Tish James or Soros, who's now under investigation. I suspect he'll get indicted next, or maybe his son. And it's all to chill our speech, to say that if we can go after the most powerful people in America, we can go after you. So don't show up to that rally. Don't show up to that protest. You will be pepperballed, or you will be arrested, or we know who you are. We're going to have people following you in plain clothes. I mean, this is incredible, incredible fascist um, kind of behavior. And I'm somebody who's done a lot of work, especially on the Russian side, understanding the rise of Putin, understanding what happened. My friends, this is not a shock to anybody.
You see
It's happened before.
not to get too far ahead of ourselves, like, do you see the fight that, all of us need to make happening at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level, as we are trying to, combat these, overwhelming forces? And we talk a lot about, the differences in our local communities matter a lot, but then we have these, very sweeping challenges that people at the highest levels of government really sending this tone of stifling free speech and equality and access to these resources. Like, as think about the activism that people need to take, is it calling your congressperson, or is it organizing locally and trying to get your state council member, your city council member, your state legislature to start working on new proposals to create some insulation for your own community or change there?
I mean, it's all of the above, right? It's a full-time job to fight against this stuff. I kind of walked away from a pretty nice career after 30 years to do my bit. And I know you're doing your bit, obviously, through your work as well, Jeremy. But look, first of all, vote to the extent that you can. If you live in Virginia or New Jersey, vote. Certainly vote next year. They're going to make it hard. They're going to make it very hard. They're not going to get rid of elections. I think that's kind of crazy. But what they're going to do is throw up different barriers, whether getting rid of vote by mail or they're trying to right now purge voter lists. They're having certainly Republican states turn over all of their voter lists, which is crazy. That's never been happening before. It never
Yeah.
happened before to the federal government. Um, the voter files. So, I mean, they're hard at work and understand that this interregnum between the first Trump administration and the second Trump administration, they worked full time to plan for this. I mean, in some ways, we had the worst possible outcome because he wouldn't have had time to do what he's doing now if he had gone straight into the second term. But instead, they had 4 years to basically plot. And so they know exactly what they're doing. They're very prepared. And they have people and have had people working on this full time, nonstop, not just going back to when Trump came down the golden escalator, but understand this is the part about the Democratic Party that I've been banging my head against the
Yeah.
wall on for decades. They started doing this back in the 60s and in the
Yeah, let's
70s.
let's talk
Yeah.
about the Democrat versus Republican machine, because I know you and I have talked a little bit about
Yeah.
this, and this idea that the Republicans have really built this powerful machine that kind of keeps running, and the Democrats perhaps I know you talked about just haven't built that out, and they're more around this cult of personality was I think the way you had described it. Can you talk a bit more about some
Yeah.
of your thoughts on
I,
this?
it's not really a cult of personality. I mean, Trump is a P.T. Barnum kind of guy, but this, if it wasn't going to be Trump, I mean, he's kind of their useful idiot, for lack of a better way to describe him. But look, this began certainly in the 70s after Roe v. Wade came into effect. You had a combination of the religious right suddenly having an ascendancy because they said, oh my God, now everybody's going to have abortion on demand and this is awful. And, for all the reasons that the evangelicals hated abortion and still hate abortion. And then in 1978 or 79, you had Pierre DuPont, who was the Republican governor of Delaware, start GOPAC. And GOPAC continues to this day. Newt Gingrich ran GOPAC for a while. Michael Steele, who some of you might know from MSNBC, ran GOPAC for a while. They have a great executive director now who's been there for a very long time, very successful. And they focus on states in ways that Democrats do not. They invest in state legislative elections with a crazy laser focus and an insane funding mechanism. And they elect state legislators who they then use as a farm team for members of Congress. And very successfully, I mean, incredibly successfully, they have an organization that has sample called ALEC. They have that provides sample legislation that all you need to do is kind of take away. I don't need to stop, cross out Minnesota and put in Wisconsin. It doesn't really matter.
For people who haven't read about ALEC, I would highly
Yeah.
recommend it. It is really, I mean, mind-blowing. And even members of Congress who sometimes forget to cross out that document came from ALEC and
Yeah.
still try and submit that as legislation.
And it's great for them because, if you're a legislator, you don't have much staff, you don't have the resources to do as a member of Congress, but in legislatures, some of the worst legislation, whether legislation having to do with climate change, environmental issues, workers' rights, the minimum wage, civil rights, all of these come from a place called ALEC. And so it's very easy it's kind of having like ChatGPT write it for you,
Yeah.
except pre-ChatGPT. And this has been going on for decades. So they're very, very, very laser focused on doing that. At the same time, you have the Federalist Society, before they came into effect, 50 years ago, whatever it was, Democrats controlled, just so you understand how successful they've been. Democrats control the vast majority of legislatures. They control the vast majority of state Supreme Court and other judicial seats. They controlled Congress for 40 years, the House, at least, before 1994. And, the presidency went back and forth and the Senate went back and forth. That hasn't been the case for decades now. And it's
Right.
because they've had things like the Federalist Society that there's no Democratic equivalent, that they will literally groom um, and train law students who then become lawyers, who then become judges, who then become justices, who then become Supreme Court justices or appellate division justices, or fill out the Justice Department and Republican administrations. I mean, all of this is coordinated, and
So
there is
what?
no
Why do you
coordination with
think that?
Democrats.
Why do you think the Democrats aren't doing that coordination then? And I'm also curious how much you think things have now changed on the Republican side, as Trump seems to be that he has really taken a lot of the reins of the Republican Party, right? That he is, telling members of leadership what he wants to do. He's
Yeah,
coming up with things that he hasn't well forecasted to them, and I agree that some of it is in Project 2025, but he also seems to be having shaken up the machine in a way that, the party hadn't seen in a long time too.
in some ways, but I mean, now you've got, the Heritage Society used to be kind of these white shoe Republicans, and now they've become MAGA. So some of these are
Mm,
now infiltrated by MAGA, but it doesn't matter. The point is they're
right.
all still very, very coordinated, right? Democrats, Bill Clinton had this great line where he said, Democrats fall in love, Republicans fall in line. And the reality is that Democrats, will see a Barack Obama and think he's the second coming, or they'll see a Bill Clinton or whoever they fall in love with. But there's no coordinated machinery that says we are going to work to elect whoever runs for president or whoever runs for Senate or whoever runs for the House, but we're also going to go deeper. We're going to go to the state houses. We're going to go to state judicial circuits. We're going to go even deeper than that and go create farm teams on local, in cities at local levels. And so all of that, I think, is a huge miss. I always said if I had George Soros money, as much as George Soros is a Republican boogeyman, he's not funding this kind of stuff, to my knowledge. I mean, I've worked in the field for 30 years. I've never
Yeah.
gotten a cent from George Soros to do any of this. If I had Bloomberg money, if I were some, democracy loving billionaire, which there are not many, this is what I would do. I wouldn't spend my money electing members of the House and Senate right now because we're not even close to doing this. It's a miracle, actually, we've won anything. And the only reason I think we've won it is because voters ultimately understand how damaging Republican policies are, but they have to experience them first, right? They will always
Mm.
give Republicans a chance because they've been conditioned to do that by all of these organizations. And as much as anybody thinks the media has been leaning left, the mainstream media has gone to us. I mean, look, you see what's happening at Paramount, CBS. Um, Warner Brothers Discovery is about to be sold to the same ownership. The Ellisons who owned Paramount, who are about to buy Warner Brothers Discovery, are Trumpers. So that means CNN and HBO are about to be gone. Fox is obviously Fox. MSNBC spun off from Comcast because it became such a liability. We'll see how far
Yeah.
they get. But even the New York Times has become much more both-sidey, and it's fine to have a both sides discussion over tax policy. It's fine to have a both sides discussion over abortion. That's okay. I mean, I don't have a problem debating both sides of, whether you think abortion is morally right or not, or whether you think, the marginal tax rate is too high or too low. I mean, that's great. Happy to have that debate anytime. But now we're having debates over whether the earth is flat or the earth is round, and the New York Times is still presenting that like both sides of merit. And it's just
So
an intellectual debate.
right, and I think that stifling, right, of
Yeah.
those organizations and right the pressure, we can do this the easy way or the hard way is really seeping in with many of those companies. But sorry, I want to go back and clarify for a second where you said if you were a Democratic billionaire, you would be funding these, like state and local
Yeah.
politicians, or you would be working, kind of to help build out these, you know, think tanks or other agencies or
I
machines that,
I
kind
I
of
would
help.
create I would create a the first thing I would do is create a GO pack on the Democratic side. There are a few that exist, but they're not well funded. They're not well stood up. Um, they don't come into they don't like, what GOPAC does is they will literally come into a state. I'm gonna make this up. They come in because 'cause I'm sitting in New York. They come into New York, and they meet with everybody in New York will meet with them, and they will say, "Hey, who's a promising person who aligns with our vision?"
Mm,
And somebody will say, "Oh, you know what, Jeremy? Like, I've seen him. I've seen his Substack. Like, that guy's good." And they will come to you and they will say, "Hey, Jeremy, you ever thought about running for office?" And you're like, "No, not really." And they're like, "Well,
yeah.
you know what? We're going to make it really easy for you. We will get you a staff. We will get you money. Don't worry about that. We will get you policies through ALEC. Just go out there. Just go out there, shake hands, kiss babies. We think you're a great guy and we think you're electable because you've got a great bio and you're a great guy." And so you're like, "Great, okay." And then they do it. We don't have anything like that. It
Mm,
is impossibly hard to break in as some like, if you woke up tomorrow and you said, "Hey, I really wanna run for state senate in New York," good luck. I mean, good luck finding staff if you're not already here, good luck getting past the machine, good luck, um, getting money, certainly fundraising. You don't know anybody, like, who's gonna raise money for you, right? You're gonna have to go to your own well, and maybe you know some rich people who'll donate, or maybe you have money of your own, but if not, you don't have an infrastructure to do that for you. They create the infrastructure. And that's what I would do. I would create a GOPAC. I would create a parallel Federalist Society. One exists. It's not particularly relevant, but you got to go into the law schools. You've got to sit down with people who are like minded
right.
and say, "Hey, do you guys want to devote your life to saving democracy?" It's not to say that you can't work at Paul Weiss. It's not to say that you can't work at one of these white shoe law firms. I'm not suggesting you go and join the Peace Corps. But what we're saying is, we are going to put you on a trajectory where if you do pro bono work at your white shoe law firms that aligns with our vision. We'll see how you do, and maybe you want to run, for state court, right? Maybe you want to run be a judge, or maybe you want to be a justice, or maybe you want to go work at in a future administration that's a Democratic administration, or you might want to work at the Justice Department. And if you do a good job there, maybe we'll run you. Maybe we'll see about appointing you to some higher court, federal court. Um, that's what doesn't happen right now. It doesn't
And I
happen.
And I think the organizations that do exist, on the, Democratic side are so much smaller. They're so much more diffuse. Like it's this, much more decentralized model. And I think as politics is becoming very expensive, you're building up all of these power players. It can take a really long time to do that. That decentralized model is a real challenge. And, I saw someone in the chat mention AOC and Zoran, right, as these like kind of
Yeah.
exceptions to that kind of political machine. But I think the Democrats probably look too much as like the exceptions as wanting to rewrite the rule, and recognizing that the vast majority of Republicans who make it to their positions of power and are really influencing a lot of this conversation do so through organizations like GOPAC with support from ALEC.
Yeah.
And
I mean, listen, Zoran and AOC are great examples, and there's going to be more of those. You're going to have a lot of influencers who are going to be going to Congress very soon because the way to get attention now is, we live in an attention economy, nothing else. So if you have a Substack with 10 million followers, like you could go to Congress. I mean, the reality is Jerry Nadler, who's my congressman, has been around for 100 years, is retiring. And, he will be succeeded probably by somebody who came up through the organization, unless some famous influencer wants to move into the district and run and pull a Zoran, right?
Heather Cox Richardson has got my vote, I guess.
Yeah,
She's
but I mean, like if
the
Heather Cox
biggest
Richardson,
Substacker.
yeah, like if Heather Cox Richardson wanted to run for Congress here in New York City, I don't know where she lives, but I think she's up in Boston, but she would win. I mean, she just would, right? Because she's got an army of people that she's developed, but the reality is she has developed that on her own. There is no organization saying to Heather Cox Richardson, "Hey, we will help you." And Heather Cox Richardson is one in a million,
Right.
right? Whereas there are, I don't know how many elected offices all around the country, but there are, I assume, tens of thousands. And you don't have an influencer for all of those, right? You don't have a famous person for all of those that can win. So they're filled typically by people who are left to their own devices. And, if we wanted to build an organization, you build it the way the Republicans build it. They don't care, right? It's funny. As I said, I used to work at Fox, and Roger Ailes, who I had my differences with afterwards, but was a TV genius, created a show called The Five that I was on.
Yeah.
And The Five is like a very big show in Fox. And he said something that's always stuck with me. He said people think it's called The Five because it's 5 people and it's on at 5 p.m. That's not why. I call it The Five because I could walk out to 6th Avenue right now and pull 5 random people off the street and put them on the show, and it would still be number one. Because this show is not about individuals, this show is about archetypes. And there's 5 archetypes, and I'm plugging in different people for each of those archetypes, right? There's the leading man, there's the girl next door, yada, yada. I don't have to bore you with it. That's what Republicans do all the time, right? They just need an archetype who's going to be in line and in step with what they want. It used to be lower taxes and fossil fuels, and now it's MAGA. But it's the same concept, and it's the same concept that is GOPAC engineered at the state level for state legislatures, and it's the same concept that the Federal Society engineers for its legal um, slots that they want filled. But that's how you create a farm team that then rises up. It took them 50 years. I mean, it took them 50 years to get full control, but this work began in the 70s when Donald Trump was, having his own private Vietnam, not getting STDs, right? He wasn't thinking about anything else. So he was slotted in almost, right?
When you think about the Democrat farm teams, right? New York and California probably, emerge as the states that have, really started to, emerge, various leaders, over the party's history. Is some of that because of the, you know, institutions and organizations that exist in those areas, or is it just because they're big states and they have big cities and people love to think about liberal elites as
I mean,
kind of
I don't know that they
that
have.
archetype of
Yeah.
Democrats?
I mean, if you're thinking about like the fact that the speaker is from New York and the majority leaders from New York in the Senate and the House, and then prior to that you had uh, the speaker was from California. I mean, it's just I think because there are just more Democrats there, right?
Yeah.
And to become speaker, you need votes, and if you start off with having if you're Nancy Pelosi and you have the entire California delegation committed to you because you're from California, well, then it becomes a lot easier because that's a massive delegation, right? So you're already coming to the table with votes, and these I don't think these leaders emerge necessarily for any reason other than they know how to count votes, and you have Nancy Pelosi was a great vote counter, and she for herself and for other things. Chuck Schumer, not so much. But you're also dealing with people who I think have kind of lost the moment.
Mm.
They're not living in the moment. They're not meeting the moment that they find themselves. I mean, Hakeem Jeffries kind of went a little Brooklyn the other day on my friend Jojo from Jersey's podcast, which was nice to see. But, but the truth is, you can't. It's very nice to fight this with sound bites, and Trump has made a career of that, and he was very successful at it. But Trump had a really strong concrete base underneath him of technocrats who were advancing his campaign once it became clear that he was going to be the Republican nominee, but also the campaigns of people below him, including people in the Senate and the House, staffing his administration with like minded people, and then going all the way down to the state level. Democrats don't have that. Democrats are on a very rickety platform with nothing underneath it. I mean, think about having a deck that you walk through and there's nothing underneath that deck. Whereas Republicans have a concrete piece slab underneath whatever deck they're on. That's the difference.
Yeah, and I think the party really needs to build out that deck, help raise up more folks, have them understand that there are, you know, money, that there's money, that there are leaders, that there are folks who can support them in that part, because it could also feel so daunting for people to try and
Yeah.
rise up into those positions. And I think trying to use states and those state legislators as positions for people to vie for moving up the ladder, right, and trying to understand who are those best folks that we do need in Congress and running those various agencies. And so it's interesting, as just having been doing this work for so long, thinking about which states, have been driving some of those, most interesting policies, have been quite progressive. You sometimes see, areas that, we might not otherwise expect, right? So I've been doing a lot of research recently on, Mississippi, for example, and the Mississippi Miracle. And right, this is an area that we traditionally do not think about as being like part of the U.S. that is able to, drive these different outcomes that we see, leaders who are able to, create success for folks. But they've moved from being, 47th in reading scores in the U.S. to 7, in a few years. And I think that's the strength of it building up really good party leaders in getting people to pass key pieces of legislation. Hopefully, we can see more people, in the Democratic Party from parts of the South actually start influencing some of these things, moving up,
No
into those higher
question.
levels of government.
I mean, no question, right? To go from 47th to 7th is not an accident. It requires years of work, but it also requires leaders who know how to do that. And it's a very easy calculus, right? You look at West Virginia. West Virginia voted overwhelmingly for what they're about to get, which is people who I think they're number one in terms of states that rely on Medicaid, certainly rely on Obamacare tremendously. There are about to be a lot of dead folks in West Virginia
Yeah.
because of the political choices that they made, whether they realize that or not, right? And you can promise somebody you're going to bring coal jobs back, and that's all very nice. But when you get black lung disease, you're not going to be able to treat it anymore.
I was
And
down in Mississippi. I mean, sorry, in West Virginia. I was also in Mississippi before that,
right.
but in West Virginia about, maybe 2 months ago now, and talking with coal miners, descending down into coal mines, to talk with some of these folks. And one of the coal miners who I spoke with there, shared this story. He's 71 years old, has been a coal miner since he was 17. He's had black lung, for the last 40 years. And he was like, look, Trump told me he would bring back coal. I don't really believe him, but I think America has gotten a bad deal. We're sending too much money abroad. He was, very worried about immigrants coming into the country. And so he was like, even though, I don't really think coal is going to come back to this area, I, voted for Trump because I believe that was the best thing to do for the nation to start getting us a better deal. But he had lost multiple sons to opioids. Had no running water to his house, no electricity. His basement was flooded the morning I had shown up there, and so this part about what you do vote for at any given time. And what kind of rises in prominence for you is really challenging. And there are no immigrants in that part of West Virginia, right? It's not a local problem for him, but it really rose to being front and center for him. And so thinking about how we can reach many of these folks, drive forward some of these most important issues like life and death issues around healthcare. The messaging for that can often be quite challenging, I think, for
I mean,
Democrats.
look, the interesting thing is under Biden, they've started to bend the curve. The DEA and Milgram, who was the head of the DEA, they started to bend the curve on opioid deaths. And it requires really diligent work, like really diligent work. It
Yeah,
requires somebody who really laser focuses on that. That's not happening right now because you're cutting state funding, money that goes back to the states to deal with these kinds of issues, right? This has to be a federal state partnership. But when the federal government doesn't want to partner in this, you're going to continue to have opioid deaths. I don't know who they're blaming them for. I mean, I guess they're blowing up boats off the coast of Venezuela
right.
to show people that they're
Cartel
fighting.
issue.
Yeah, to show people they're fighting against this. They're not. I mean, the way to fight this is much more domestic and much more granular. Um, when you're not going after when you're allowing doctors to prescribe painkillers willy-nilly, like, that's not some cartel doing that. That's the Sackler
Right.
family. Um, and,
Yeah, and I think to your first point, right?
yeah,
People I think don't realize how much more important those federal state partnerships have
yeah.
become, that so much more funding is pass throughs to state governments, to local governments than it had been. Like, we are not living in FDR's America anymore. Many of those, Build Back Better plans ended up going to states, to local governments to say, hey, what do you need to
A
build?
hundred
And giving
listen,
them autonomy on that.
100%. The biggest literally the biggest problem I had with Joe Biden, other than Merrick Garland, but the biggest problem I had with Joe Biden was that his comms shop, and he did not know how to take credit for this, and I will tell you, when you have Republican senators voting against the Build Back Better plan and then doing ribbon cuttings with their Republican governors like Ron DeSantis, connecting, I forgot, it was like the bridge going through the Keys, which basically used to flood and keep the Keys all isolated. And now there's some new bridge that's going to go up thanks to the Build Back Better plan that's going to literally allow people in the Florida Keys to like travel when there's rain. Um, you know, they vote against it, and then there's the ribbon cutting, and it looks like it's a state DOT initiative. But the money's coming from the federal government down to the state DOT. And it should have been Joe Biden doing those ribbon cuttings and saying, "This is happening because of me."
Right.
Like, he should have got on the road. Instead of saying, "I spent $1 billion on infrastructure," you could go down to, Hellertown, Pennsylvania, the swingiest town in the swingiest county and the swingiest state in the nation, and say, I'm making this up because I have no idea what their infrastructure issues are, but saying, "Hey, this road on Main Street in Hellertown, Pennsylvania, that's getting paved, and you guys have had 20, probably, I don't know, over the course of how many years, blown tires because that pothole's existed. That pothole's getting filled because of me," right? Not because of some amorphous $1 trillion infrastructure plan, but this little pothole on Main Street that you've all cursed the heavens because every time you go over it, some awful, something happens to your tire. That's because of me. Not because of your governor, although Josh Shapiro's Democrat, but not because of your governor, because of me. And yet people don't realize that because, again, the money flows through the states. And a lot of people in the states got really rich thanks to that money and created a lot of political goodwill because of that money. And yet that money was purely because Joe Biden was able to get that passed.
And it's interesting because, many of these shifts began right under, Nixon's new federalism, under Reagan, really shifting the balance of power. And yeah, Reagan did a, kind of fantastic job of, still taking, credit for some of that work while also making it feel like, it was really in the power of local governments in the private sector as well, fueled by, right, government, grants and programs there. But Democrats, once again, I think has been a consistent message of this conversation, like, have not taken a page out of that Republican playbook to think about where they can message, get that credit for that work, because I think that's how people can realize, like, oh, this, bridge, this program is not a DeSantis program. It comes from.
Look, I mean, to sum it up, and I might do a Substack on this. I have done it, but I might do it again. Like, Republicans are playing three-dimensional chess, and we're playing checkers, and that's all there is to it. And I'm not saying that Trump is playing three-dimensional chess because Trump can't think more than, it's not even that Trump can think one move ahead. Like, Trump can barely put the stuff on the board.
Yeah.
But as an entity, the Republican Party, whether it's the Federalist Society or GOPAC or ALEC or any of these organizations that, again, exist irrespective of who's in the White House, they are. It's funny that Trump rallied against the swamp because they are truly like the permanent bureau, kind of political bureaucracy. They are the swamp in the best way possible. I mean, I
Yeah.
tip my hat to them. And Democrats are just sitting there thinking, well, if we just put up somebody who's, not an African American woman, or, we have to find like they're trying to construct some perfect next candidate, right? Well, it can't be Josh Shapiro because he's Jewish and that might really, he's strong on Israel and that might offend, people in Dearborn, Michigan. Like, instead of going down the list of who's good or who's bad from existing people, there's no infrastructure to back up whoever it is. I mean, Republicans were able to elect Donald effing Trump. Like, think about that. The
Yeah.
biggest disaster in the world, because that organization was so strong that they were able to propel somebody like that to the White House. And we're sitting here thinking, well, it can't be Gavin Newsom because he's a little too, flippant, and it can't be JB, Pritzker because he needs to lose a few pounds. Like, it can't be Kamala because she's a woman. It can't be Hillary because like, all of this is nonsense. It
Yeah.
can be whoever, if they could elect Donald Trump, we can elect, like, find me a circus freak and I can elect that guy. I just need an infrastructure to back me up.
And it's interesting. I feel like Kamala's, new book, so much of the commentary around it has been, Julie, exactly your point, which is like they, trying to think about, these, personas of so many of these different folks and whether they're right or wrong. But it's about, yeah, can we build the machine to get folks elected? Can we align, on message? Can we, count the right, votes and districts and regions to actually get everybody behind that? That's
Yeah.
totally right.
And I'll tell you, there's somebody in the chat that said Kamala is black and Indian. That's the main thing. I'm going to say this: a man named Barack Hussein Obama won Ohio, won Florida, won Indiana, which no Democrat had won. I think maybe since Roosevelt. I forgot when, but it was maybe Johnson. No Democrat had won Indiana since Lyndon Johnson in 1964. So I'm not suggesting there's not a tremendous amount of misogyny. I think it's more than racism. I think it's misogyny, and I think that hurt Hillary, and I think that hurt Kamala. But if we can elect a guy named Barack Hussein Obama, and if people like those people in Indiana who voted for Obama didn't suddenly become racist the day after Obama got elected, right?
Right.
And in Ohio, and we have to take responsibility for why we lose. We can't constantly blame it on um, uh, sexism or racism or anything else. They exist, and they exist in tight races enough that you could swing a tight race. But I'm telling you, if you just attribute it to the fact that people don't want to vote for a woman to be commander in chief, or they didn't want to vote for a black woman or an Indian woman, again, 7 years after 9/11, we elected a guy named Barack Hussein Obama. Like, that is the last election that I cried election night because I could not. I was so proud of this country. Like, I was so proud of this country, not because I particularly thought Obama was a better candidate than Hillary, or because he was going to be a better president than Bill Clinton or Joe Biden, who came after him, or anything else. It is precisely because we elected a black man named Barack Hussein Obama.
Yeah, I
So
had that same
yeah,
feeling,
so
Julie,
so
too. And
so this country has not suddenly become more racist the day after the 2008 election. And if we think it's just that, then we're not going to do the hard work of understanding why they keep winning. We
right.
elected an insurrectionist, adjudicated sexual predator to the White House. I mean, think about that. A man who was indicted on I don't know how many counts and convicted, I don't know how many counts. And yet that man is sitting in the White House now. And it's not because they stole the election, and it's not just because people are sexist or racist. It is because they had an infrastructure dedicated to getting whoever the Republican nominee was going to be, even an adjudicated sexual assailant who was convicted of state crimes and indicted on many more federal counts, who incited an insurrection in this country. If that's the candidate they were handed, they were going to get that guy elected. And if the
Yeah.
candidate was going to be you or me, they would have gotten us elected.
It's also so interesting, building of a political machine is probably not the sexiest thing that most people think about when they think about, politics or running, for office. But in my experience in, talking with so many, state and local policymakers and politicians and young people who are change makers and activists in their communities, I actually do think that part of building out this machine can be so amazing for them because it's helps them see that path like upwards, for making impact at some of the highest levels of government and really, seeing, I think this term that you've continued to use in the conversation around like the farm team and how you can kind of build folks up and, through the system, that I think can be incredibly inspiring for folks because if, they maybe just think like, oh, I can only, make an influence in my, town or community or county, they might not want to, put their family through that or that, financial
Yeah.
commitment, those years out of work. But I do think there's a lot to be said, not only for the impact it can have, but also the influence and hope that it can inspire for a lot of folks.
And, I understand you're not going to get instant gratification, right? Like, this requires a lot of work. It's generational work, it's multi generational work. We are really behind. We're at least 50 years behind. I mean, look to Roe as the time that they all decided to get together and take over the court. It took them 50 years to do it,
Right.
but they did it. And it took them 40 years to get the House back, but they did. And they've pretty much controlled it on and off ever since. And again, that's what I mean about them playing chess. They're very patient, they're very good at it. They have tremendous funding. People, some in the chat here are talking about the Tea Party. The Tea Party was a Koch brothers joint. It wasn't that, everybody thinks that some anchor on CNBC got really angry on the floor of the Chicago Stock Exchange. It was like, God damn it, we need a Tea Party. Like, and everybody was like, to the barricades. There has like Les Mis moment where everybody started running to the barricade. No, it was the Koch brothers because I used to sit next to those people at Fox and I would say to them, who were Tea Party leaders, and they would all work for organizations. And those organizations were Koch funded organizations. And what was the impetus for the Koch brothers to create this Tea Party? Well, they really hated climate change policy because their money is derived from fossil fuels. So the first thing that was going to happen is you're going to create this notion that some people say that climate change exists, but other people say it's a total hoax. We'll have a fair and balanced debate about that. Well, 99.9% of climate scientists say it exists. You found one or two that were like, it's a hoax. So all of a sudden people are like, oh, maybe, I don't know. I'm not a climate scientist. One says one side, one says one thing and the other says another thing. So like, I'm not going to delve into it. So I'm not going to worry about it. They achieved it brilliantly. And they had a media infrastructure that was built up, and Fox was the first. But Fox now, the average age for Fox viewers is about 71, 72. Charlie Kirk, I just want people to understand this. Before he died, Charlie Kirk, at I believe the 2008 Republican convention, he was 19 years old, went to a man named Foster Friess. Maybe it was 2012. It was very recent. Went to a billionaire named Foster Friess. This is a 19-year-old kid who was a nobody. He went to a billionaire named Foster Friess and said, give me $10,000 and I'm going to go into universities and colleges and I'm going to turn those kids red. And Foster Friess said, well, it's $10,000. What's that to me? It's nothing. Right? And that was the startup money. And it would be as crazy as me saying, give me $10,000 and I'm going to go into evangelical churches and I'm going to turn those people Democrat.
Yeah.
But you had a billionaire that gave a 19-year-old kid what was probably the equivalent of 2 cents to you and me, because what's $10,000 to a guy who's worth billions?
Yeah.
It's like, go to town. And you know what? He probably gave that kind of money to 25 other Charlie Kirks who did not succeed. But the point is, they had the vision to say, hey, kid, go ahead and do this. Same thing with Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro got $5.5 million to start his media empire. That's a lot of money, but it's not that much money in the large scheme of things. It is now worth $500 million. There are probably 5 or 6 other Ben Shapiros who got that kind of money who didn't succeed. But the reality is, they didn't just rest on their Fox laurels. and said, well, okay, we have this network that's viewed by, more people than anybody else. So we'll just go. They started seeding the ground with young people. And eventually those young people became older people. And eventually those people began to have power. I mean, Stephen Miller is not even 40 years old. Maybe he's 40 now. I mean, think about that.
Right. Yeah, and it's so interesting, the part of like where do these movements rise from, right? Is it sort of this like organic groundswell, or is it, kind of this top down approach? And for those, wealthy Democrats, which sometimes feel like they're getting fewer and fewer as somebody, of these, tech CEOs feel like they're, kind of turning the other way. Where are they in trying to like, seed those, folks that can really be driving that conversation forward and that narrative? I want to end though with a thing that we always kind of end with on, the American Inequality newsletter, and in these conversations, which is, the path forward, right? Sometimes it can feel like these issues are so overwhelming. They're so interconnected. We've covered so much ground. And so trying to think about what are some of those, kind of specific steps, that, people on the call can take, that the Democratic Party can take, that our leaders can take to start, moving the tide a bit on this. One of those things that I think, is, clear to me from this is really trying to build out that machine. We've talked quite a bit about that. I think number two is, and what I'm excited to read when you write it for, Salty Politics and your Substack is this article of, 3D chess versus checkers, right? And how the Democrats can, start, changing and playing the same game that Republicans are. But what else do you see as the path forward?
I mean, I would say this. If you have a good idea, if anybody watching this has a good idea or wants to run for office or thinks that they can walk into a college campus and turn those red kids back to blue, or think they can walk into an evangelical church and turn some of those people red to blue, whatever your idea is, just go with it. And if you don't have a billionaire funding you, you could just organize yourself. I mean, it requires, as I said, it requires a lot of work. But all it is like sweat equity, right? Like I started the Substack a year ago just because I felt like it. And now it's kind of become almost a full-time job,
Yeah, no, it's really been amazing to
crazy,
watch it grow.
right? Um, Everybody can do that if you have something to say, right? If you have nothing to say, go call up your local Democratic Party and say, hey, I want to volunteer and go door to door. Like whatever it is that you can do, just try to build something. Try to build something. Anybody can build it. Even if you don't have the vision for what it is, join an organization that does, right? We're launching, just to tell you, we're launching a media network in the next couple of months, but we're launching a morning show on
Oh,
Monday.
nice.
Yeah, on YouTube. And then if anybody wants to subscribe on the Mayday
That's amazing.
network. And the only reason I bring this up is not to plug it. Well, sort of to plug it also, but the
No,
reason
no, we'll
yeah,
share it
we'll
out
plug it.
afterwards.
Yeah, but the reason I bring it up is because I'm so sick and tired of hearing people say how much they hate Morning Joe because those guys went down to Mar-a-Lago and bent the knee. And I was like, what the hell? Nobody else is doing a morning show that actually tells people the truth and won't bend the knee to Trump. So we'll do it, right? So we're doing it. Like I've never produced a morning show. I've been on TV, I used to work at networks. I know how to do TV, but I've never launched a morning show. Like, what am I doing? I don't know what the hell we're doing. None of us knows what we're doing, but we're just doing it.
Yeah.
So my point is, it's just to tell you, like, anybody can do this. Seriously, anybody can do this. Anybody. And if you want to launch your own show, go ahead. And if you don't know how to do it, contact me. And if you're good enough, we'll put you on our network. Like, not good enough, but if we have something to say, we'll put you on our network. If it's not going to work out with us, it'll work out with somebody else, or just do it yourself. Go hold up your phone and speak to the camera. Like, the point is to get out there, not to let them cow you into submission, not to obey in advance, to quote, Tim Snyder, who I think that phrase has become so ingrained now. But I mean, really, it's going to get worse unless we fight back. And I think a lot of people are sitting there hand wringing, saying, what do we do to fight back? And the truth is, especially in your local communities, Congress is Congress and it's far away, but in your local communities, just do it. Like, seriously, just do it, because that's the key to getting anything done.
Yeah,
Um,
I
yeah.
couldn't agree more with that, and I think is such a powerful note that in the local community that is really where so much of this change starts. And yeah, I think in particular, just to put a fine point on it, that it really often starts with one voice and one person speaking up and trying to do this work. And so I am really excited to hear about the network, and we all be sure to kind of share that out with
Well, thank you.
subscribers too, and
Thank
send it
you.
along so that way everyone can kind of tune in, because I think exactly as you said, for people who have something powerful to say, if the ways that you or I can amplify that work is so critical. I know you had also kind of worked on that piece recently, which is that we are now in this like the papers please era, right? That we are
Yeah.
living in this incredibly challenging time. And so the ability to, push forward powerful messages, come together, build out some of these institutions and engines is absolutely critical. And so I'm glad to be, kind of working with you on so
Well,
much of
thank you.
this. And there's, a lot more coming.
And I just want to say what you're doing is so important because you are the one person who I've sort of met through this process who's really laser focused on data and how data impacts the states. And I think empiricism is something that is not in vogue these days because everybody's very emotional. But it is only through empirical data and only through looking at this can we figure out what's working, what's not working, how we message, where we message, and to whom we message, and especially at the state and local level. So I want to thank you for that. I'm so
Appreciate that, Julie.
honored that you had me on your show. And
Yeah, no, and dad, I think, even for this part of like going into these communities, right, going into the church, into the college to convince someone, right, I have found that as like that easier entryway in to say like, here is something that, is a starting point for us to talk about, to, revolve around in those challenging conversations. And so, yeah, it's, not only is such an important part for shedding light on these things, but it's also one of these really helpful avenues for opening up that conversation.
got it. I agree 100%. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank
And
you, Julie. Yeah,
see you soon. Bye, everybody.
sounds good. Bye.
Bye.